This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with film and television director and editor Roger Nygard. Um, Roger, in the first segment, I had asked you if season 8 has kind of an overall theme, the way more recent seasons have, such as last year's Seinfeld reunion being nothing more than a giant scheme for Larry to get back together with Cheryl. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the upcoming season without giving too much away?
Yeah, it almost seems like Larry alternates because you remember the season where he was in the producers on Broadway, and that had a very specific running story. And Larry, I guess, doesn't feel like he has to top himself every season with something bigger and grand or more grand. He just wants to make sure that the show is funny. And this season, season 8, does not have as much of a running theme as last season did. And what ends up happening, at least from the perspective in the editing room, is that when there is less of an overall theme from episode to episode, there's less story, then we can keep more of the funny stuff. Because when there is a story continuing, you cannot really cut the story. You need the story. So we end up cutting jokes. So you actually get a funnier season, I think, in some respects, when there is less of an overarching theme. So season 8 does have kind of a very flimsy overarching theme, but it's so flimsy as to be almost non-existent. And so the episodes really are almost all, you could say, are standalone episodes.
Got it. Got it. Oh, that'll probably a lot of people will enjoy that, and then of course they can pop up in any order almost.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, the theme as it is, I can tell you this, is that Larry goes to New York City. And so half of the season Larry spends in New York and half he spends in Los Angeles. The reason for his trip to New York is kind of the flimsy, overarching theme, but it's the fact that it's so minuscule is what makes it so funny. His reason for going to New York is so tiny. That's part of what's so funny about it, I think.
Well, watching the show over the years, and Seinfeld even before that, always reminded me when I was very young. I did a lot of magazine work, and back when there was magazine work to be done, and I did a lot of long features. And I had an editor who said to me, "Look, here's what we want you to do. Take the story, and instead of writing about the entire, think of the story as the beach, full of sand. But instead of writing about the entire beach, all the sand, pick up one little tiny pebble of sand, put it under a magnifying glass, and that's what I want you to write about." And it seems to me sometimes that an episode with Larry, or as again Seinfeld before it kind of is about nothing, and it's taking something that most people would just take for granted in their lives, or they would just kind of brush off, and it becomes everything to him.
I said, Larry, you're like the crusader for the common man. You're out there defending us all over the social injustices that we all face at some time or another. The guy in the carpool lane, or the person who takes too long in line, or the whatever. And that's part of what's satisfying about it, as well as it being funny, or you could say it's uncomfortable. It kind of depends on which side, who you're identifying with. I don't get uncomfortable watching this show. I guess it's hard for me to say because I see it day in and day out, because I'm identifying with Larry. And in the editing room, we call him he's our guy. Okay, we gotta be aware of who our guy is, and that he's our hero, right? Larry's he's the protagonist of the show, so you can't really you don't want to dislike the protagonist. And I think that's what's great about Larry, is that he is, despite even in his angriest yelling rants, I think he's still so likable.
Some people might disagree, but yeah.
Oh, totally. I know there are people who would completely disagree with that, but that's how I see the character.
Well, I guess, I was born in New York. I grew up in New Jersey. I watched the show, and again, Seinfeld before that, and I always feel like I know these people. I know people in the Midwest, maybe in California. They don't know these people. I grew up around these people. I still know these people, and I'm very, it's like, okay, it's just,
Well, you should really, I think you'll enjoy this change of venue to New York City, where Larry interacts with the New Yorkers and the New York scene and the New York way of doing things, and eating lunch outside and going to museum openings. And there's one show that I cut that's a really funny show with a comedian named Robert Smigel.
Oh, sure.
Probably heard of Triumph the Insult Dog.
The ambiguously gay duo.
And he plays a character in the show, which is hysterical. And between he and Larry, when they were improvising together, it was very difficult to cut those scenes because they were laughing so much. But you got to find a way. So they'd laugh and they'd back up. Okay, say that again, and they'd back up 2 lines and say it again, and maybe get 2 lines further, and then another big laugh and back up again, and so it makes the editing more difficult. But also, you know that you're onto something when people make Larry laugh. It's Larry knows he's doing something right because he completely judges the show by what entertains him and what makes him laugh. So if you like the show, that means you and Larry have very similar sense of humor.
And I'll be getting my own HBO show soon. There you go. I like that. I like that line of thought. Now, I'm assuming that you're not on set while they're shooting.
No. I've visited set a couple of times. Usually when we do the cast and crew photo, we'll drop in and, food is always great on the Curb Your Enthusiasm set. But no, I'm spending the time in the editing room. Editing is a very time-intensive job. It's really about sorting through volumes of information, coalescing it down to not just the best, but putting it in the right order as well, and that just takes a lot of time.
I kind of figured. And I'm thinking that you and your fellow editor, Steve, probably have a very different relationship with Larry David than the people who act in the show, the producers, even some of the other technical people, because, and maybe it's because the way I imagine the editing is set up, but I would think it becomes an almost intimate relationship in a, not that there's anything wrong with it, I couldn't resist that way, but because, at times I imagine it's just you and he in a room looking at rushes, looking at scenes over and over again. Am I envisioning it the wrong way? Or is it something different than that?
No, if you're going to pick an editor, if you're a director, and I've been on both sides, I've been the director and the editor, you've got to be with somebody you can stand for many hours a day. Because, you're spending a lot of time together. So if somebody rubs you the wrong way, it's just not going to work. And part of being a good editor is being that kind of person that you can get along with people and not rub them the wrong way for hours on end. And I guess being easygoing, right, is part of it. You really have to be an easygoing person, I think, to be an editor and not take things too seriously. And I certainly don't take life very seriously. If you've seen my documentary, The Nature of Existence, and maybe Trekkies and others, and I don't take life seriously. I think life is meant to be laughed at. That's how we deal with mortality is through humor and the very serious subjects. And Curb Your Enthusiasm, whether it's Curb Your Enthusiasm or my documentary or my films or whatever, comedy is about helping human beings deal with serious topics. Because you'll go crazy if you take things too seriously. If you focus on your own mortality and the downside, there's a reason that we forget in life, we forget the difficult things that happen to us, the painful things, and we remember the good things. As time goes on, you remember mostly the good things that happen to you in your life, or that's what you focus on naturally. The brain does that naturally, because if it didn't, we'd go crazy. And I think shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm or comedy or my documentaries are part of that way of looking at the world.
It's interesting, as you were explaining all that, I was closing my eyes briefly and thinking that I was hearing the narrator for The Nature of Existence back at work again. That was good.
It's the same guy. It's
I know,
the same
I know.
the same philosophy. Everything. All my work has humor, an element of humor to it. Whether I'm directing, writing, editing, because to me that's the key. That's the key part of life. The key to enjoying life. At least certainly one key, but it's certainly an important one.
Now I want to come back into that editing suite again. So Larry's coming. let's say you were still editing. I know the season's over. You know what? Larry is coming in an hour. He's going to be there. Do you make sure that you have something particular on hand because you know he likes to munch during editing, or they're drinks or eating drinks, or the topics you know not to bring up when you're going to be elbow to elbow with Larry David for maybe a couple hours.
Yeah, you don't feed Larry David. He's got very specific feeding regimens which have to do with eating healthy.
Okay.
I mean, talk about being sort of intimate with somebody in a work situation. Oftentimes when the show is finished, Larry goes on vacation, and often he'll go to Martha's Vineyard, and that's during the post-production. So what we do is we bring an editing system to Martha's Vineyard, put it in the guest house where Larry is living, and spend 6 weeks or a couple months. Steve Rash, the other editor, and I will take turns. I went for the first 6 weeks during season 7, and so I'm spending a month and a half editing on Martha's Vineyard with Larry, hanging out, and we eat lunch together. And he's got a chef that prepares his food just the way he likes it, and it's delicious. Having your own personal chef, right? And I got to share that with Larry, as well as hanging out and chatting and talking about whatever, sports, the weather, girls, food, in between working in the editing room. But as far as what you have on hand in the editing room, he brings his own food. He comes with his own goodies. He knows what he wants for lunch. Luckily, so we can go to the same restaurants when we're getting takeout and stuff like that.
It does not sound like it sucks.
No, it's great. Working with Larry David is fantastic.
and now you're working with him, and do you work for Larry? Is it Larry's production company that you work for, or do you work for HBO or someone else? How does that work?
Well, there's a production company that is specifically for the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. And but I feel like nothing matters except what Larry wants for the show. So he's the guy that we all work for, but he's also very collaborative. So you're working with him too. I mean, he knows what he wants through instinct. Generally, you're not going to convince him if something feels wrong to him in an episode. You're not going to convince him otherwise. And I've seen people try over and over, and oftentimes I've taken them aside when Larry's out of the room and said, I've seen that look on Larry's face before. You can keep arguing the point, and you may move him a little bit, but just so you know, it's a lot of energy you're using that you might want to use somewhere productive. Because once he's got that look in his face, that's what's going to happen. Because the show is based on his instinct. When I asked him the story about casting of J.B. Smoove, who plays Leon.
Right, he's great.
It was everybody's favorite, and because I love the story. He said that when J.B. came in to read for the part, before he even opened his mouth to speak, he made one of those faces at Larry, and Larry started laughing. And I said, Larry, did he already have the part at that point? He said, yeah, he had the part as soon as I was laughing, before he even opened his mouth and spoke. Because Larry feels something, and so that's what works.
Now, you've had 3 seasons of working together, and they may be 10 episode seasons, but obviously you're together a lot more than 10 weeks. You said it can take months. How different is your relationship today working with Larry than it was that first week coming in to edit? And Steve Rash, you said, has been there since the beginning. So you're the new guy, and suddenly you're elbow to elbow with Larry on his show. You're an experienced guy. Clearly, we've established that. But still, how different is the relationship from week 1 to the end of season 3?
I'm trying to think if there is any difference in it. I can't think of anything. The first week is just like the last week, because if it's going to work from the beginning, it's going to work to the end. And I remember my job interview when I went in to meet Larry. I got a phone call from somebody at HBO. When I was actually in India when I got the call. I was shooting The Nature of Existence, and I said, I'm out of town. I'm out of the country. I'd love to meet Larry, but I can't do it because I'm shooting my documentary. But if you don't have your second editor, in 4 weeks, happy to come in. Turned out, I guess they met several people, didn't click, and so I was back in town, and they said, hey, are you back yet? Do you want to do the meeting? I said, okay. So I went and met with Larry, and the meeting lasted less than 5 minutes, maybe closer to 3 minutes. At first I was chatting with the other producers, and Larry walked in and said, so why do you want to work on this show? I said, because I want to learn from you, Larry. I want to see how you do what you do from the inside. He said, oh, you can't learn anything from me. That's a big waste of time. A few more questions, and we talked about The Mind of the Married Man because he knows Mike Binder, and how did that go, and then he left, and on the way out the door he said, he seems fine. And I had the job. So he goes from instinct. He goes from what his initial instinct is, from meeting people, as well as you got to have, some credits and resume and a referral or two. That doesn't hurt. So the first week was the same as the last, because I guess we clicked in a way that that works for what works for the show.
One more question for this segment. We'll come back, and I want to talk to you about, when we come back, we'll talk about The Mind of the Married Man, and you work with Bernie Mac, and The Office. I want to talk to you about that. But earlier you had talked about that it could be very difficult sometimes to cut episodes of Curb, especially when there's all this improv going on. Is there some tremendous material that's been left on the cutting room floor at Curb, and on top of that, are there some great outtakes, outtake reels floating around?
Yeah, of course there's great stuff. We cut out a lot of great stuff at times just to cut it down to time, to get down to the 20 under 30 minutes, 29 minutes and 58 seconds or less. But Larry is not really interested in bonus material. And so it's like, if we don't use it, it's gone. And maybe it'll come back in another season. It's still in his head, and things have come back in other seasons that didn't make it into prior seasons. I remember, the jokes that were done, cut out, and then tried again later and worked better the next time around. Or working with different actors, got cut out, and sorry, we had to cut you out, it just didn't fit, and then brought back for the next season. So they're always favorites. I mean, some of the stuff makes it onto the gag reel that's shown at the wrap party, but that's probably as far as it goes.
That's a shame. I know a lot of people would probably love to see some of the stuff that gets cut from that show. Just it's almost, not having ever seen it, it's still somewhat legendary in that you think it must be some great stuff that gets cut just for time reasons. So I'm sure.
Larry, the way he thinks about comedy is it's not about quantity, it's about finding the right fighting weight for the show. And so whatever gets cut out as a result to make the best possible comedy, it's really irrelevant, and it becomes unimportant. He's not about just the diarrhea of material. It's about the best possible cohesive show. And as you see, he likes the shows that kind of weave around and bring you to some place that's a complete surprise, where everything ties up, comes together at the end.
All right. Well, let's take one more break. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with a good friend of the show, third time guest, Roger Nygard. He is third time, that's right. And he is the one of two editors on Curb Your Enthusiasm for season 6, 7, and upcoming 8. And of course, we got to get in one more mention of it. He is also the director of The Nature of Existence, which is available in a much expanded DVD package, which I think is what we need to get Larry to do. So let's keep showing him that package. Maybe every time you see him, say, "Look, Larry, look what I did." We've got one more segment, and we'll be right back.